Welcome to the Simply Well podcast. I'm your host, Sadie Jane, and we're coming home to the wild within you. And apparently, it needs a little disclaimer, I think, because apparently some of us think that, and I won't even say some of us, maybe there's just some assumptions out there that is the wild is the same for all of us. Or maybe I'm projecting that onto others. And wow, apologies if this is coming off a little harsh. I have an exciting episode for you guys coming your way today. I'm so excited to finally be back with you guys after a little bit of a summer hiatus, being with my family and my kids. And it just happened to be that something really profound in my life happened around the same time when I was like, I'm going to take a little break on the podcast. It just happened to be that way. Of course, coincidences, we know, are never coincidences. It happens perfectly. And I have the absolute honor of having a really powerful conversation with you guys today with one of my favorite people, one of the most powerful Scorpio queens I know. She literally flew in from LA for this conversation. My dear friend Sarissa, we met when? 2019?
Years ago, yeah. 4 or 5 years, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like, 2019. So Sarissa and I met through a dear friend, Kara. We've literally met in the physical once. We spent a weekend together in LA.
Yeah. Yeah, we hung out.
We hung out before the world collapsed.
Before the world collapsed, closed down, shut down for some time, actually.
Yeah. And since then, I've just had the honor of like connecting with you for social, texting, talking through some of the most insane politically climate changing, world changing actions, spaces of our lives.
Yep.
And it's been so, beautiful for me to have you as a friend to educate on so many things, to bounce off some ideas, to have, in this space where the world is like just,
it's different right
now. It's different. And I can't wait to show you and share with you to my community because you're really just, I just think it's so beautiful. She's going to talk to you guys a little bit about, but you'll feel her energies. I just feel like, especially nowadays, it's really hard, and maybe it's coming more and more, but to find somebody who's so concrete in who they are. And this was even before, I think we're getting more because obviously all the last even 4 years are pushing people to be like, who actually are you?
Yeah.
But it's really fun to watch you and witness you. She's one of my favorite people to follow on social media. She's becoming more adamant and out there. She's coming out of her Scorpio shell. She's incredible. She's like, I'm going to botch what she is. But to me, she's incredible at PR. She does consulting for a living. She has for many, many years, PR for a living. And then she also brings in the metaphysical with tarot card reading and astrology. She's done my astrology reading before, and she's just very, very self-aware. And that's really essentially what happens when you're a really good facilitator and a guide. You are self-aware, which you need to then go into other people's realms to understand what's happening in their stars. So I'll stop talking. Please tell me a little bit about you. And we're going to this is going to be a good episode.
This is actually not the first time we've had a conversation sort of in this thematic and in this vein. And I really appreciate, I think it was 2020, the last time we like sat down, and obviously it was virtual at the time because pretty much everything was virtual at the time. But one of the reasons why I like you, Sadie, and why we've stayed in touch, at least from my end, is I think there's a conversation to be had about a willingness to grow and to move away from what's familiar toward where you're being called. And obviously I've done your chart, so I know very much that is part of your journey, part of your path. But as you kind of just mentioned, it's also sort of part of everyone's path. I remember when things shut down in 2020 and, people were kind of in a few different camps, right? They were spiraling. They were like, there was like a lot of loneliness that was coming up, which I think we're still sort of dealing with on some level. There's people like me who I thrived in quarantine.
You would, you Scorpio.
For better or worse.
Yeah.
That was, not having the obligation to like leave my house. Don't tempt me with a good time. And then there was sort of these people that were like, okay, I'm going to use this opportunity to like establish new hobbies or learn something and I feel like that's kind of like the middle spot between the people that were like, I'm not where I want to be, and people are like, I'm exactly where I want to
Mm-hmm.
be. And I have sort of identified you as one of those people, and using that quiet time that is obviously now since transitioned and changed into, the world is back open, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But I really appreciate being invited here. To your point, I am a practiced communications professional. I've been in some form of PR, comms, crisis management, reputation work for the better part of 2 decades.
Wow.
Almost. And have been, we'll say, have been interested in astrology in earnest since childhood, but practicing astrologer for about a decade or so.
Wow.
And, got into tarot as another sort of metaphysical modality, I would say about 5 years ago in earnest. And I do readings, and I incorporated it into my more traditional work, and it's been life-changing. It's definitely a hack, as the kids like to say. So yeah, it's a little bit about me.
Well, it's funny because we were at lunch before this. We were just talking about the correlation between being in a PR space and also, using that directly with your metaphysical practices. And it's interesting to me, this question just came up, and we actually talked about channeling too. So of course, with these interviews, the questions come and we just flow. But you as a person are very inward. You're like, I'm not going to speak, which I love. There's so many things that I love about who you are, which is why you're on this podcast, and why we're talking about this specific topic today. Mm-hmm. But I love that everything that comes out of your mouth, is going to be not just truth, but important.
I try.
I just think it's so admirable because coming from a place of, I have a completely open throat center in human design, and I also am a recovering people pleaser. And
Do you
used
really?
to. Yes.
Oh, wow.
I mean, it makes sense.
You're a projector.
Yes.
Okay.
An ego projector, which is like super rare and super intense, but it's also so beautiful.
Yeah.
But I've had to really learn when to speak and when it's important to speak. Yeah. And you've been a really good vessel of just like watching you and how you do that. So I bring that in because somebody who is like, I'm only going to speak when I need to be speaking to, or when I feel like the crowd is in the space where
they can hear
they
me.
deserve it.
Yeah.
And doing that for your job, like, cause you're very out where there is your job. How was that working in those places?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I've ever really considered that like in earnest. So what's interesting about PR as a practice, and I'm someone that like I went to school for PR. I majored in it in college, and it's not really taken seriously, especially in some of the spaces that I've been in. Like I've worked at PR agency, and I've worked in-house at some major companies with regard to like being in their comms departments, de-escalation, et cetera. And I think the traditional view of PR, if you've ever seen like, Sam Jones on Sex and the City, or there's a movie that I personally really like. It's called Thank You for Smoking. And I can never remember the guy's name that stars in it, but he's a very good actor. But it's basically about a group of lobbyists into Washington, D.C. And lobbying is basically like PR on steroids. I would say PR as a discipline, it's pretty dark. I think marketing in general can get a little dark, but lobbying is like, it gets a little extra dark because you're PRing on behalf of entities that ultimately will impact legislation, which is rule of law and how people live, right? So the premise of the movie, Thank You for Smoking, is basically you have this group of lobbyists and they work for like the Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms. There's like, I think, an environmental guy in there. So they're basically essentially putting forth what we in the business kind of shy away from, but what I would refer to as like spin, as it relates to like how harmful these things are, how harmful alcohol is, how harmful tobacco is, how harmful firearms are, et cetera. And their entire job is to convince people that the things that might be bad aren't as bad as people think they are. And here's the messaging as to why. So not that I'm necessarily framing myself in the best light, but that's essentially
you see the opposite. You've seen that.
Yeah, 100%. But also like, I've worked for entertainment companies. So it's, it gets dark sometimes, but not that dark. But when you're someone whose job it is to need to know what to say and when to say it, and even though I do feel as though I'm given to that naturally, I've had a lot of training and discipline and game time experience with that as well. So it sort of comes to me as a matter of course. And in my own life, a lot of it, and any PR person worth their salt will tell you, audience is key. Knowing your audience, knowing what they're receptive to, knowing, this is going to sound kind of diminishing, but what they are able to handle hearing. Because sometimes messages come to us before we're actually ready to sort of start integrating them. All of that has factored in. And then once I sort of started to kind of layer on and understand the ways in which I could incorporate my understanding of the esoteric, the occult, my intuitive nature, I will say it's been a gradual process. It's been a journey, but it really has changed my entire practice. And, tangibly, I think the results I produce are better because I've spent a lot of time fine tuning that. And, it's been fun. It's been interesting. I've gotten to do some really exciting things and work with some really interesting people as a result of it. But yeah, that's the tea.
So do you think that ultimately it was like your subconscious being like, I have this key, or in my term and community, I say medicine, to help people adequately be able to speak what they need to speak. And I can do that just innately.
I think that is actually one of my gifts,
Yeah.
one of my downloads. So I am a Scorpio sun. I also have a Scorpio moon, which I don't recommend to anybody. Not that you have a choice, but but so the North Node placement, the lunar node placement that we have in our charts, if anyone's familiar with that terminology, is kind of like a destiny point. Different practitioners will call it different things, but basically it's a goalpost on our life's journey, right? And you have your North Node in Vedic astrology. It's a Rahu and Ketu, Rahu Ketu. Your North Node, North Lunar Node, is essentially where you're trying to grow toward, and your South Node is where you're sort of growing from. Mine is in Gemini, which is the sign of the chatty Cathy. It's literally ruled by Mercury. It's grounded in communication and ideas and thinking. And it's in my second house of material goods, the way that I make money, values, and worth. So literally the design in my chart encourages me to share and guide communication. Now,
which is the cosmic joke.
That is the cosmic joke, because I don't really have shit to say.
Totally. Or you don't want to say it.
Or I don't want to say it. Mainly because, again, we were talking about this on the way here. I don't love repeating myself.
Yeah.
At least not when I feel like I'm trying to get a message across and I'm having to kind of say the same thing over and over again. And there's the Scorpio in me, and I have a lot of Scorpio placements, including in my actual Mercury. So my North Node is ruled by my Mercury, and that's in Scorpio. And Scorpio Mercury, so Mercury with a Scorpio placement, is in essence need to know. Like only information that you're getting from me is the information that you know how to ask for. And a lot of people don't know how to ask for that. So I do also feel like part of my life's design and mission is to encourage people to read between the lines, encourage people to observe what's not being said as much as what is. And I feel like, again, in the work that you do and the work that I do, so much of the people who come to us with intentions that maybe aren't as pure, or maybe more selfish, or maybe are meant to mislead and misguide us, they use that. They leverage that. And, I can see it when it's happening, but I know a lot of times other people cannot. So I think part of the work that I do, and part of the way that I balance the scales of fortune and karma, frankly, given some of the energies that I've worked for and with, is by shining a light on some of the things that other people might miss. And
because they're aware, they're easily aware to you.
100%.
Yeah.
And reminding people that they have agency and they have power and
sovereignty.
Another, the energy of Scorpio inherently sense in this idea of manipulation, because people think of manipulation as inherently negative, and it's not. Sometimes you're manipulating things to positive end.
Right.
You're trying to get your child to eat vegetables.
Totally.
You blend it up, you put it in a smoothie that tastes really good, tastes like fruit, tastes like sugar, but they're getting, half their daily intake of beta carotene or whatever the hell. That's manipulation, but it's to the benefit, right? So when you look at it through the lens of neutrality and cause and effect, it becomes a lot easier to kind of do that sort of work. So remind people that they have agency, reminding people that they are in charge of what they decide to go along with is a big part of the work I do as well.
Yeah.
Because you can choose to allow yourself to be manipulated if you're having a good time.
Totally. The accountability piece is massive. And we are getting
Radical personal responsibility.
We have to look at it now. Like, and if you haven't looked at it now, you're just going to keep getting it thrown in the face over and over.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's so interesting. I wonder, when did you start molding those together? And I want you to answer this by first explaining, what are these big corporations that you've worked for? Like, maybe paint people a picture of, like, this is the big, I mean, I don't think it gets any bigger.
Yeah.
And so because you worked for these big leagues, was it in those moments where you saw the manipulation maybe go in a different way or in a dark way, and you're like, oh, people aren't aware of this, I can use divination practices to help bring that together?
Yeah. So I've worked for Disney. I've worked for now Meta, but I started when it was just Facebook and Instagram and, WhatsApp. And I've also worked for agencies that have some of the biggest clients that, you name, like L'Oreal, international corporations, Nintendo. I mean, the list goes on. But having touched that work, and, we live in a capitalist society, right? So you're talking effectively more often than not about money, profit, revenue, and scale, the amount of people that you can get buy-in from on a particular thing. And for those who aren't aware, the role of a PR practitioner in a corporate setting is mostly to convince people, not necessarily to buy, but of a talking point or a topic. So when you have a product launching, it really actually doesn't matter what company it was for. But
Right.
for example, let's just say, Disney's working on a new content initiative. You want people to tune in ultimately. So ultimately you're trying to get conversion in terms of like the sale or the eyeballs on the screen. But the way that you do that isn't necessarily to just say, watch this when it comes on, or use this when we put it out, or buy this product when it launches. Marketing in general, including PR, because PR is a subcategory of marketing, is all about the sale. So when you talk about it from the perspective of, what is the value offer to the client, the customer, the audience, as it were, for PR? And why is it something that is relevant to them, and why should they be listening to it? What that showed me, in terms of my understanding, both of the practice of public relations, of communication, and also as it relates to me as a person, is that people are going to do what they will with the information. People are going to interpret it and, again, integrate it in their own way. But beyond that, there's the factor of like a timeline. So sometimes they say that basically you have to share a message a minimum of 7 times before it starts to kind of even hit the right neurons once. So repetition is inherent in the job, even though I'm someone that hates repeating myself. And also delivery counts. So going back to the point I made earlier about tapping into your audience profile, if you're speaking to a certain demographic, let's say, you're launching a new kid show, you want moms of children ages 5 to 9 to tap into this show, which ultimately then would lead to things like product placement, merchandising, things like that. So you get buy-in. What you want to do is frame the information in a way that says, okay, this is for you. Here's why it's for you. Here's how you'll benefit from it, because that's a big part of sales as well. And here's why you should stick around to see more of what we do with it. And that's literally the most basic 101 course of any product that you can sort of think of, right? With rare exception. And, we have terms for this in the business. We call it branding. We call it awareness. We call it advocacy and evangelism, et cetera. But the net of it is that every day we receive messages as people, as human beings who operate in society. And the messages are telling us what to do. They're telling us how to live. They're telling us who we are, telling us who we're not.
And like all subliminal. Yeah.
And sometimes directly, because sometimes that is part of the marketing.
Right.
But
it's almost like, do you think they do it directly?
Yeah.
So that they can also do those subliminal underneath?
100%. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like sometimes they'll tell you directly and you'll be like, I like that. That's a straight shooter. But in reality, like, what you're identifying with is the idea that you like this company because they're straight shooters and so are you. So you find the places where there's commonality from a marketing perspective, or from a PR perspective, or from a sales perspective. And that's where the connective tissue is, which goes back to what we were just talking about radical self-awareness, radical personal accountability, and really looking in between the lines. Again, manipulation isn't in and of itself inherently a negative thing. But if you're allowing yourself to be manipulated without your full consent, that's where the danger starts to be. So if you want to align yourself with a certain brand or a certain mission or a certain position, doesn't matter where, that's one thing. But if you can't quite articulate or put your finger on why you're doing it, other than, you like the brand colors, or you like the characters that are
Mhm.
involved, or you like the product itself, I would say that these days it requires a little bit more digging,
Yeah.
from that
Yeah.
perspective. Yeah.
So then you were in that and you saw not necessarily manipulation in a bad way, but then you were able to see this construct of navigating people's psyche
Yeah.
and marketing and all those things. And you said you were always into astrology. So were they always maybe subconsciously succinct?
I think so. I
Yeah.
think without me fully realizing what was happening at the time that I was doing it, I was divining or intuiting that, okay, this is how we need to address this audience. And in actual practice, it's hit or miss. Sometimes you misread the situation. Sometimes there's other factors at play that you may not be aware of that does have impact on like how your message is received and interpreted and actioned on. But I also think that there's a lot of power and I guess application in knowing when to retreat. I'm using a lot of like warlike terms here, but when to retreat, when to kind of come back, when to reposition yourself. And that's
Mhm.
also something that I definitely have learned a lot. There's a certain amount of flexibility required in this job anyway, because so often plans change, timing changes, resources change,
Mhm.
who you're going after changes. And that's just the nature of the business. But adaptability, while also being able to sort of self-identify what part you're playing,
Mhm.
is a big key when it comes to like successful PR campaigns, and also like as a recipient of this information or of these messages, being able to identify what is actually for you.
Mhm.
And from a consumer standpoint, knowing that like if there's a brand or an entity or a company that you used to have a lot of affinity with and they've shifted, where that disconnect was and why you're no longer resonating as well. So
Mhm.
again, going back to that idea of self-awareness and personal accountability is a big deal.
I love that you're talking about the science behind what we consume literally every day and every single second of every day. Because even the idea of social media has
I mean, we're
been,
constantly being marketed to. There's
well,
ads everywhere for everything.
yeah, and it's cured, like social media is cured to be or curated to be an addictive behavior. I
100%.
mean, even I justify it because I create a business on it, but then it's
I
like
mean, same. Yeah.
so easy to, and it's what they
Just
do.
get down into that rabbit hole and keep scrolling. Yeah.
Totally
Time. In the business, we call it time spent.
interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I think about how interesting that was, like even as a child and wanting to see like beautiful things and how that's addicting. And so then
Mm-hmm.
they've like portrayed that there.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that now you're newly in this space where you're an entrepreneur into this beautiful,
Finally.
yeah, this place of bringing in the PR and the metaphysical, the divination tools, the
Mm-hmm.
astrology. And at least for me, and we'll get into this in just a second, I've been able to benefit from this and from your wisdom and your medicine. But I think now more than ever, we have to be, and this isn't just awareness like what's happening out there, but I think awareness and awareness of who we are will help us find that awareness. Cause you're like, okay, you like Disney, but why? Just
Why?
because they're easily deliverable for you. So what does that actually mean about you?
Yeah.
And it's just so nuanced and such an interesting topic to even like such an elephant of a topic to communicate about.
So a lot of times people often like when they start to self-identify with a brand, using Disney as an example, when Disney as an entity does something that these, like they release a movie maybe that people weren't a huge fan of, the reason why you see like these campaigns against these big companies, these entities, is because there's a part of them that was identifying themselves
Mm-hmm.
with, I like Disney because I like
Mm-hmm.
things that feel magical.
Mm-hmm.
It awakens my inner child.
Mm-hmm.
It feels safe. There's a lot of bright colors. It's fun. There's
Mm-hmm.
music, etc. There's this idealism that we then project, that then is projected back to us.
Mm-hmm.
And when you think about it like that, one, it's admittedly, again, this is a Scorpio me, like it takes some of the shine off of it. It's not as fun to
Mm-hmm.
think about, but also like what it does do in my mind is it allows you a space of consent. It allows you to be
Mm-hmm.
like, this is a way for me to escape, and I'm acknowledging that it's an escape, and I'm acknowledging that I'm using it in that way. Um, but I like it, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be a bad thing to want to like
Mm-hmm.
escape from your own life
Mm-hmm.
for a little while, as long
Mm-hmm.
as you're aware of the what, the why, and the how that you're doing it.
Yeah. Well, I love that you brought that in too, because it goes perfectly into projections in general and like people loving a not even just a product, but like a brand.
Mm-hmm.
And then not loving it.
Yeah.
Immediately when it becomes not in their favor, or maybe when they feel like they have been manipulated, or maybe, and ultimately all these projections, whether it's I'm obsessed with you versus you did me dirty, they're all projections of what you've allowed, the cords of energy we've allowed out. And that's ultimately, I think, what we're becoming more aware of in society is these attachments that we have, which ultimately are taking away our sovereignty and taking us away from our
using things outside of ourselves to define ourselves.
And that's
being
what
self-defined.
Ultimately victimhood.
Yeah.
So that brings us to an interesting topic that I have yet to discuss publicly. And I love that it's happening now. I mean, I think it was June, May?
Yeah.
May.
Yeah.
It was right before Costa Rica.
Boy, that flew by.
Wow.
Okay.
And I love that it's happening now because ultimately it's gone, it's past, but also there's so
Water
much
under the bridge.
Totally. But I just think it's, first of all, I never talked about it publicly. So I love that I can talk about it now because I do have things to say about it.
Love that for you.
Perspective.
Love that for you. Yeah.
And I also think that it goes so perfectly with our topic that we're talking about now, manipulation, I already said manipulation, victimhood, all these things.
Sovereignty, personal accountability,
cancel culture, what that even is, cults, allowing ourselves to belong somewhere so much so that we take away, or we allow ourselves to think that we're taking away our sovereignty, or we allow people's projections of such to put us in that position.
Yep.
So let's go back to May for a sec.
Okay, let's do it.
So I'm driving home from baseball and I get a text from an old friend. And she's like, just so you know, and I hadn't been on, it's been a second since I've been on TikTok. I have like maybe 60,000 followers on there, but just for the record, like they're from viral posts that like people hate me on. I don't think they're actually like followers. Like I've had a couple viral.
Followership on TikTok is interesting anyway.
And they're all like 12 and they hate me.
Yeah.
Genuinely. It's like my viral ones from my kids or something. I like decorated my daughter's locker and it was, people were so mad at me. Anyway, I digress. They were like, how dare you? This is so creepy. What if she wants to decorate her own locker? How did the school let you in there? They are
12.
Genuinely.
You need a job.
Genuinely 12.
Get
okay.
a job.
So
start a lemonade stand.
Literally. So I don't go on there. And it also is just another one of, I have an extremely addictive personality and I use it for my benefit for my job. And ultimately it just was distracting me during a really important time in being a mom, a business owner. Anyway, so she's like, I don't know if you saw it, but there's this girl that posted a TikTok about Utah. Okay, let's see if I use the term right. Utah influencers turning woo cult leaders. She's like, she doesn't say her name in the video, but in the comment section, people kept asking who it was. And in her words, she said, I'm a little bit scared to admit this or say this or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's simply Sadie Jane.
Yep.
And initially I was like, why did you tell me this? Yeah. Like, I'm just,
it's so funny imagine we had that conversation. I remember.
Totally. I'm like, imagine hating me and I'm just like driving my kid back from baseball.
One-sided beef.
I'm literally just like trying to make him feel better about like striking out.
Yeah.
You know? And so I'm like, it's not going to be a big deal. She's like, I just wanted you to know before it goes viral. I'm like, why would you put that out there? It's like she knew, but she's actually extremely intuitive as well.
Yeah.
And so I was like, it's fine. It's going to be fine. 24 hours later, it's viral. And we had
can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How did that, like, what, because forgive me if I'm making an assumption here, but I don't get the sense that you're necessarily new to a little bit of controversy on the internet. So what was the differentiating factor for you in that moment where you were like, shit?
There's certain things that don't bother me that are talked about, certain things. And also it's depending on, like, I know there's stuff on Reddit, but I don't go there. I know people talk, I know people share my profile. I know they talk about lots of different things about me, but there are a few things that because of me and my triggers and what's real about, maybe there is some truth, the nervousness of how I'm portrayed. It's almost as if I know that being on the public eye, I have to be mindful about not everybody loving me, but I know that what I'm doing is perceived as something different.
Yeah.
and there's misunderstanding, and I hate that.
Yeah.
I used to hate it more, especially this. I'm actually
Absolutely.
really grateful for this opportunity to
Yeah.
like dig
Talk
my
about
roots
it.
deeper.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this was different for multiple reasons. One, it was a viral TikTok,
Mhm.
and I was blatantly portrayed, right? Two, because it was this concept of spirituality, cults, followings,
Which have very real consequences and can be dangerous, frankly.
so dangerous,
Yeah.
which ultimately I am aware of
Yeah.
because of my previous history with the religion that
Yeah.
I grew up in.
Yeah.
There's so many different factors to this. And another reason too is, and it was interesting because it was like, okay, this is fine. This will die down. And then people kept sending it to me. People kept talking about it. Oh, I'm defending you. Oh, I can't believe this is happening. I didn't actually end up ever watching it.
Good.
I
Good
wouldn't.
for you.
Yeah, I'm like,
It's not
but
necessary.
the little bits that I saw, I ended up going over and blocking her in all platforms because I was like, first of all, she doesn't get any access to my energy.
Protect your. I was going to say protect your energy.
Yeah, and she just doesn't. In my perspective, I felt like she really didn't understand who I was, where I was coming from. The other piece that was really interesting that really, because then I was like, who is this girl, right?
Jot down a thought. I just had it, but you said something. Please continue.
Okay. And feel free to interrupt me.
Yeah, no.
But I little did I know I was like getting to know this woman, right? Like if people are like, it's not a big deal. She talks about influencers all the time. She talks about cults all the time. She's left the Mormon church. And so that actually was really activating for me because I never thought it would be somebody who had left the same confines of the same religion to accuse me of something that I had actually received back from the religion that had taken it from me. Right. So that was a piece that like I've never talked about publicly, but it was so interesting. I actually videoed, recorded myself kind of talking this out.
Yeah.
About what actually the things, the implications that she said actually didn't affect me because ultimately what happened is, and this happens with any kind of something that's said about you, is it true? One or yes or no?
Yeah.
Right. If there is truth to it, how can you fix it?
Yeah.
Like
if you care to fix it. Yeah.
Right. If it's true to the point of, is it affecting people's integrity, your integrity? Is it affecting what you believe? Is it affecting your morals?
Yeah.
You have to be willing to not change based off of the public.
Yeah.
But you have to be able to say, is there truth in that? Where is it? How can I adjust?
Yeah.
At least for me, that's where my moral compass lies. So every time something like this happens or I catch wind of it, because I genuinely, people talk about
You're
energy.
so smart not to engage in that stuff.
People talk about energy harvesting all the time in the spiritual community. They're like, Burning Man's energy harvest. Taylor Swift concerts are energy harvest. I'm like,
Beyonce concerts.
The devil's there, right?
Yeah.
I'm telling you, the energy harvesting is in your comment sections.
Oh.
The energy harvesting is these people so adamant about their opinions that they can't even look at another opinion.
Yeah.
The only constant is change and the only constant is evolution. And if we're not willing to look at the other piece of the side of the story and be like, is there truth there? That's why we have a right and a left in the first mother effing place.
Yep.
And it's just actually exhausting. It's not even like my cancel culture. It's like in general, people, these posts go viral and people are pissed because of how they make a banana sandwich or whatever it is, So when this happened, I don't know why the banana sandwich, but it just happened. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do know.
But when this happened, I was like, is this true? And ultimately,
you're asking yourself
of
that.
course. Yeah. I'm silent. I'm not watching it. I'm not commenting back. I'm not looking at anything. I'm going inward and I'm saying, what can I learn from this? And what I can do is grow my roots deeper into the truths that I know, which is my mission statement, what I've created for women, what I believe I want to do for women. And it ultimately comes from my experience of what I've been through. So when we talk about why it affected me, I don't know why I assumed this. It's good that I didn't realize I had this belief in my mind that like we would just like everybody who potentially left an organized religion would just like band together and allow other women to just have their own freedom to reclaim their spirituality for themselves.
In whatever way they see fit to do. Yeah.
Clearly that's not the case.
No.
And I'm glad I learned.
Yeah.
Because what I was doing actually is I had an expectation on these women that I didn't even know, nor did I know that the expectation was there. So what I was able to do is be mad in my own way of like, how dare you?
Yeah.
I'm actually reclaiming, I'm giving these women an opportunity to say, you actually can reclaim your spirituality within you in your own way. Let me show you how I've done it. And then you get to find your own frequency in that. But she doesn't even know that because she doesn't even know me.
Yeah.
So that bothered me.
That
and
other
then
piece. Yeah.
so that was a huge piece. And then the other pieces were just funny because it was talking about my credentials, and
Which you have a lot of.
It's,
by the way, you're like certified through your nose.
It's so dumb. Actually, I did the chat GPT thing, the roasting of the Instagram.
Yeah. Yep.
And the first thing it said was like, are you trying to win a, what does it say? Like
degrees.
A Nobel Peace Prize for all these degrees. But you know what's wild is like she attacked me for the one thing that I have a shadow of. So of course she attacked me for that, Sarissa.
Well, yeah.
But so then I don't say anything. Okay. So I don't say anything. And then it just kind of like happens and it continues to grow and continues to grow. And it's between two of my huge retreats. And I'm just like, it is what it is. People are commenting. Oh, so people are commenting and then she's deleting comments, which is also like,
I did notice that too.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And then also some people are sending me screenshots of the mean comments. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
I don't need.
No.
So then I have to like, like, thank you so much for letting me know.
Setting a boundary.
Totally.
Yeah.
But I'm like, actually don't.
Yeah. And finish your thought.
Okay. But I was just going to say, most of them were like, oh, she's changed. She's weird. And from what I gathered without reading them, that was the consensus. That was like and I'm like, it became sort of like oh my gosh, congratulations. It kind of like, it settled my nervous system because I'm like, yes, absolutely. I will always change.
Yeah.
I will, just for the record, if you're listening, I will always change. And also I will always be weird. I will always be changing and weird.
So powerful. It really is.
I have to be. I can't. Being normal for me actually gave me mental illness.
What is normal?
What is normal? Being told how to live and what to do and what to wear, to be a mom and not a businesswoman, and to be clothed and not a sexual being. Like I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
So it calmed me a little bit. And then I have nothing to hide. I guess apparently people were going on my TikTok and asking, where are your credentials? And I was like, oh, I'll show you. And I showed them.
Yeah. Because you actually have them.
A lot of them. And a lot of them I couldn't even there was just, the list is long. Not like I believe that you need that.
No. And said, I'm not receiving any hubris or arrogance from you when you say it either.
Yeah. Well, and
it's just a statement of fact.
To my point too, it's like, I love to learn.
Yeah.
And I come from a medical background. I come from a background of higher education, and I've had the privilege of being able to do that. And it's something that I will always, the ROI is massive. I'll always.
And it's lifelong.
It's lifelong. And it's also been able to carry through everything I've invested in myself has ultimately gone back to my business. Mm. So I share it and I post on TikTok, and then I get on TikTok, I post it, and then I get it back off. Don't read the comments or anything.
Yeah.
And apparently people are really upset and they think that my credentials are fake, other than my registered nurse degree. And these are people saying, what's a pelvic floor specialist? So I clearly...
Which is like, that's a legitimate job. Like there's a lot of people that do that job.
Why would I listen to somebody who doesn't even know what that is?
Yeah.
Reprimanding me. Those are okay, this is so rude, and I'm going to say it anyway. Those are the people... Safe space on the internet as we do a public podcast. These are the people that don't think they have any other option but to have birth control. Birth control isn't inherently bad. But when I have issues, or when I have a client with issues with pelvic floor, I'm not going to immediately get them on a medication. I'm going to help them understand.
Does birth control even help with your pelvic floor?
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
Literally. And there's...
The pelvic floor is a muscle.
4 layers of such, 7 layers in some spaces. And so it's like, anyway, I digress. I go through all of that. Here's Sarissa texting me. Ding, ding, ding. She's like, girl.
I did pop up. I did.
Girl. She's like, I've seen what's going on and you handled it perfectly.
You did.
And I
say that as a PR person.
Exactly. And oh my gosh, you don't even know how much I needed that in that moment, because although I can be internal and I can just be like, it is what it is, people are going to talk shit. Ultimately too, just because of the climate of the world, the way you handle it is also so watched so powerfully. And also, I feed my family with this.
Yeah.
And I've put everything on the line to create this space. And I also tell women that they can do the same. And I believe it. And they have in my spaces.
Yeah.
So there's some stuff on the line.
Yeah.
So then I was like, oh my gosh, thank you so much. And then ultimately, you became my PR guide the rest of the situation, which she'd say no, but she really did. She was so helpful. And ultimately, I didn't say anything else after that. In fact, I actually went back
You
and
said what you had to say,
archived
and
it.
that
I
was
was
it.
like,
Yeah.
here you are. Goodbye.
Yeah.
So I loved the way that we kind of talked about this, and then also talked, and because actually, if I remember right, it wasn't even, you were like, you'd handled it perfectly. And then I was like,
I kind of came out of left field.
you really did. And what was so beautiful about you coming out of left field versus anybody else in my community is when I started this podcast saying this about you, but you will not say something unless you mean it, and you will not
If I have nothing to
sugarcoat.
add, I will not be adding.
And also, you won't sugarcoat. And I actually love our friendship because we don't agree on a lot of things, I'm sure, if we went into the political climate. However, I do know that you'll tell it to me straight. And I think a lot of this is like, I've been in this for so long. And like I said, I'll always say, is this piece true? And so I'm like, Sarissa, give it to me straight. Give it to me straight.
Yeah. So it's interesting because like when you talk about, since I've been on TikTok, and part of the reason I enjoy TikTok so much as a platform is because of the algorithmic approach. And, we don't have to get into like the data and the information and living in your phone of it all, but versus any other social media platform, except maybe Facebook, just because they've been around for so long and they have so much scale to pull from. But even like Instagram, I think is the easiest comparison. So much of what we receive is what we put out. And that's true in life, but it's especially true online. The funniest thing that would happen to me when I worked at Instagram, and I promise you I'm bringing this back, is very often the men in my life, like friends of my husband, men that I would talk to at like work events and things like this, usually straight heterosexual men, would come to me and they'd be like, my girl keeps yelling at me because she like peeks at my explore page and there's all these like bikini babes on it. There's all these swimsuit models and I don't know how it got there. And I'm like, interesting. And the truth of the matter is it got there because you're engaging with those posts, you're following those people.
Yeah.
And that's not a judgment. It's just
observation. It just is what it is.
You stare at the abyss stares back at you, and don't you ever forget it. So what's interesting to me is that since I've been on TikTok, I've actually been on ex-fundamentalist, what I'll call ex-fundamentalist talk. And I think it's because of my own journey with spirituality and religion. Fun fact that some people know, it's not really a secret. Again, it's need to know information, but it has context and relevance here. So my mother is in the Nation of Islam, and which for the uninitiated is a subsect of Islam, and it's very militaristic. There's a focus on embracing Blackness. Some might call it Black supremacy. And that is a foundational aspect of this particular religion. It's very strict. And there's a code of conduct for the men and women within this religion. And I was in it until I was about 10 years old, obviously through no choice of my own. But my mother, to my knowledge, still follows it to this day. But I've always had a sort of observational relationship with religion and with spirituality. And it's not that I don't necessarily believe in God or source or spirit or Allah or whatever you want to refer to him as or them as. But I believe that our relationship with the spirit world, above all else, should be personal and should be what we choose. So whether you have a relationship and you believe in many gods, or you believe in no God, or you believe in one God, it should be down to you. Now, when you start to implement, we'll get into the discussion around cults and what all that actually means, because there is a definition. That's something different. But I bring this up to say that like I was actually served that video because I am in that particular algorithm as someone who's also theoretically an ex-fundamentalist of a type, even though I was like literally a kid when I divested. But what's been interesting to me about like learning about the other types of ex-fundamentalism, people who were really deep into certain types of Christianity, former fundamentalist sects of Christianity, obviously Mormonism, ex-Mormons, things like that, is this idea that like when you've fallen out of the group, of the organization, of the
Mm-hmm.
religion, it becomes really a journey of, again, reestablishing and refinding yourself, which is what I found compelling about the conversation. I'm curious about all kinds of religions and ways of engaging with spirit. In my house growing up, so my mom was definitely a fundamentalist in her own way. But my dad was not necessarily religious. He's a Panamanian dude, Jamaican by way of Panama, came to America when he was a kid with his family. So there's that first generation angle. And I would say that that side of the family, they're Christians or Catholics, because that was the religion du jour from where they're from. But he never pressed it on us. And in my house growing up, we had the Bible, we had the Quran, we had the Book of Mormon, we had the Torah,
Wow.
we had we had writings by Khalil Gibran, and name a philosopher, I probably grew up reading that kind of material. So I was served the video that you're talking about, and kind of segueing to the other part of this conversation, what's interesting to me, and this isn't like a judgment necessarily, but obviously in the course of my career and in my personal life, I am someone who tends to be privy to a lot of information. Those are some of the notes I was taking. So when you talk about like knowledge, just in general, in the abstract, what you learn cannot be unlearned. Once you know something, you cannot unknow it, but it also cannot be taken away from you. So once you see something, once you gain insight on it, you're going to have that forever, right? And until you lose your mind, basically. And I remember when I got served it, I had a sense that she was talking about you, but I wasn't sure. And then I opened up the comments, because it's like, obviously, like we follow each other on social media, and I know you have a followership. But you've been kind of quiet lately. Like, you kind of stepped away from that aspect of your business, and you really only pop up when it's necessary. So the first thing, I thought that it was strange that she's sort of like still following you that closely, even though your frequency of engagement in that way has been so much lower. So that was like the first interesting thing, which to me signifies that she's like really checking on you. The second thing was that, like, I had imagined, based on, the kind of communities that you were formerly part of and that you are currently part of, that people were sending this to you. And I have an interesting relationship with giving people bad news. Again, if it seems like it's not necessary, I don't necessarily want to be the one to be the bearer of that. Especially if it's not helpful. So I send you this video and I tell you that this person's, someone's talking shit about you. And that's not to judge the people who sent you the video, but from my perspective, you ever seen The Wiz, Eveline, Don't Bring Me No Bad News? You should watch it if you don't. It's based on The Wizard of Oz. It's like the Black version of The Wizard of Oz.
Love. Okay,
so she has like she has a whole song about not bringing me any bad news. And I'd never like to be the person that pops up and we talk pretty frequently, but I'm not going to ruin your Monday by being like, especially when like what she was saying didn't even really make sense. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it was kind of like, what? So that was the first part of it. But then I saw you posted something. So I was like, okay, so she has awareness. And that was why I approached it the way that I did.
I did post on Close Friends.
You did. So I was like, okay, she has awareness, because I was sure that other people had sent it to you. And if you hadn't said anything, you would have never heard from me about it.
Yeah.
But because I knew that you had awareness, it wouldn't be me introducing it to you.
Right.
I was like, okay,
right.
This feels productive, I guess is the word I'm looking for. And to be clear, I do think there are scenarios where it makes sense to tell a friend, like, oh,
of course,
this bitch was talking shit. But like,
of course. And her intentions were pure. It was very much like, just so you're aware. And I ended up thanking her because it did blow up.
Yeah.
So it almost gave me time
to prepare for it. Yes. And again, I think we all serve those specific roles. And I've definitely been that person for people before. But, if you're following your intuition, if you're following your guidance, spirit, source, whatever, your gut will tell you when it's time to pop up and when it's time to STFU. So once I saw that you had posted, I was like, okay. And the way in which I decided to engage was like, rather than being like, yeah, girl, I saw that. And but it was more like, you know what? You actually are handling this in the most excellent way. You girl, you did that. And the reason why I had the reaction was because the thing about people, and I wrote this down too, and their projections, because that's, I think, what it is that somewhere along the way, and this is all speculation on my end, this is not, I don't have this confirmed from this individual, but there's something about you in your flow, in your freedom, that was a trigger for her. And immediately, once I like deduced what was happening within that video and within the comment section, it read to me like projection. So it's interesting that I bring that up also, when you talk about being ex-fundamentalist, ex-Mormon, having kind of quote unquote fallen out of favor with the organization, if she's someone in alignment with the idea that she's no longer part of that organization, as you are, like also have fallen out, then it would make sense. It would stand to reason that you guys would have a commonality there. But what I was sensing was that, one, you're probably further along on your path, right?
As far as regaining the accountability.
Again, it's the radical self-awareness, radical perception, and sovereignty. You use the word sovereignty, and I love that word because it says exactly what it is. Is this, I belong to me. And it seems to me that, like, when you spend your whole life being frankly indoctrinated in that way, and then you decide that you want something different, you do spend a little bit of time floating in the ether. What do these things mean? Do I believe in God? Yeah, go ahead.
I was just saying, and at that point, there's bitterness, there's rage.
Yeah. Because you spent so much time. Yeah.
So much. People leave, and to her point, to give her empathy and grace in that, I get it. It's so awful to wake up one morning and say, none of it is real.
I can't do this anymore.
Are you kidding? A spiritual psychosis is horrible.
Yeah.
So to that, I get it.
Yeah.
And then it's also like,
it's also very human.
1000%, which is why there's so much of that in the ethers. But then it's also like, that's where observation of the differences.
And you have to kind of turn, instead of holding up a mirror and being like, woo-woo cult leader, be like, oh, where are the areas of darkness in my shadow that I see someone like you, and it makes me mad. It pisses me off, kind of. And you're like, you're weird now. Yeah.
I love everything you're saying. I also wanted to add really quickly what I love about, and it's important, this is why I'm speaking about this: education, knowledge, power, reading, research, awareness, noticing. All of those are why you actually, Sarissa, are so good at what you do, because of the awareness of the time that you take to understand what's happening.
Context
That's
counts. Why you think you just fell out of a coconut tree? Just kidding.
Totally. Right. So it's interesting because although of course you were not raised in the Mormon faith, you have this interesting perspective, and that's why you were dropped that video. There is a shadow of me where, although obviously I cannot adequately speak to this because one, I don't know her, and two, I didn't fully watch the video, but it seems a little bit like as if there was not education around me, her knowing me
and
and
journey,
my journey. And not only that, but my business and what I do and how I serve in my community.
Correct.
Mostly it was just an attack on the assumption that because I have a large culture and I have these women who, maybe we dress in white, maybe we howl at the moon, maybe we get together and scream and release our traumas, maybe we dance in a group setting. Totally on the outside, it's like, what the fuck?
But also, not every group that gathers is a cult, which is, I think,
exactly what is. Yes, is being assumed, which then ultimately,
because that's what she's familiar with, frankly.
And also, then what's safe? So then, the people, the women that are specifically, and I'm going to specifically talk about the women because the women are oppressed specifically in this church, and maybe all churches potentially. Where is it safe for them to gather? Where is it safe for them to actually come back to themselves? And on your point, pray to their higher self, their own goddess, their God, their selves, Mother Earth, which are, for the record, all even nothing. Pray to nothing. Sure. Is that spirituality to you? Maybe.
Yeah.
All should be welcome and are welcome in this community where I'm helping women find themselves again.
Yeah.
So,
I mean,
education's important.
Like I said, once you have the knowledge, that you can't repossess knowledge,
Exactly.
But from the PR perspective, I've done a lot of crisis work in my career. I've done a lot of reputation management work in my career, and I won't say the work is easy. It is high pressure. It is very stressful work, but the solutions very rarely vary. Like, you pretty much have the same initial approach, and then the situation has to unfold, which is why it's so important to pause, wait. Silence is a response. Observation is a way to respond. And I think a lot of people are uncomfortable with being quiet.
Total. Oh, I am so much.
uncomfortable with listening,
with assumptions just being made at you.
People really want to fill in the blanks, right? And I understand what you're saying about perception, because I don't like being perceived. And I once explained to a friend that the reason why I don't enjoy being perceived is not because I don't want people looking at me. I'm shy. Look away. That's not it. I don't really care. It's that if you're not perceiving me the way that I'm intending to come across, that's where the disconnect is. That's where the problem is. Like, I completely understand what you're meaning. But what was interesting about that moment and your just intuitive handling of the situation, that's why I actually opted to reach out. Cause like, without really any guidance, at least from what I could tell, you were like, you know what? And to me, that just signified growth. It signified a powerful approach. And it is exactly what I would have advised in that moment. If you're going to say something, make it purposeful, make it intentional. I feel like there was a little bit of humor, which people can appreciate. And a big part of kind of spinning the wheel on a situation like that is knowing, again, going back to audience, knowing who you're talking to. You're not trying to convince the people who agree with her.
Yeah.
You're not, which I think I said that to you. Cause you were like, well, should I put it? Should I share this? Should I share that? And I'm like,
I did. Like after that video, I was like, so do I
said, leave it alone, because you already you've already spoken to the people who are like, I don't know. And even the people who are kind of like maybe on the fence in the middle, wait, is it a woo cult?
Totally.
You're like, well,
now they're questioning, like, are you?
But also, like, to me, what came across to me as an observer, and someone, again, who speaks the language of messaging, is you are free to go, which is the key differentiating factor. By the way, cult is short for culture. So, like, by definition, we're all part of a little cult in some way, shape, or form, because we are all part of a culture. And I think part of what happens when you divest from harmful institutional structure is isolation. It can be very lonely to do that, which I understand. And there, I think, can almost be kind of fear of rejoining or reconvening with a community of any type, especially when you're talking about the context of like how women are treated in this particular organization that you're speaking of, versus, seeing you get out with your girlies and commune and like talk about your periods and howl at the moon. We're like, oh, okay. But the reality is that, and I could talk about this for all day, but community is essential to humanity's success. As a species, we need community. You need other people. You need to be able to bounce ideas. You need to be able to share resources. You need to be able to connect with other human beings. We are social animals. We are literally evolved primates. So when you think about it from that perspective, even if you step away and you take a little bit of time to figure out your own sovereignty and your own purpose and your own radical accountability, your self-awareness, if all goes well, you will eventually come back to a community, to a culture, not a cult, a culture. And what I was getting from her video was, again, a projection of a lack of that. So you somehow fell out of favor, or fell out of I guess, assignment with this culture that you had grown up in, that you were super duper familiar with, but had rebounded and found a place for yourself. And my guess is that she has not done that yet, which is why she felt compelled to say something about it, because in her mind, it cannot be that there is a place that is actually safe, where you can kind of show up authentically, you can show up as yourself, you can engage in ways that feel safe and comfortable. And maybe it looks a little bit weird from the outside, but that doesn't automatically mean it's a cult. It just means that you found a group of homies that you vibe with, that want to do the same things that you want to do. And then when the day is over, you kind of all go back to your life, and, nobody's required to like follow rules or be punished for all eternity.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's so wild that, I mean, because you see it, I mean, it's like the craze right now, even on Hulu, these documentaries.
Oh yeah. 100%.
And they're crazy.
Yeah.
And I'm like, how are people not seeing this?
Yeah.
Right. And so of course there's this shadow side of like, I mean, just spiritual culture in general is so demonized because
but there's also like a lot of grifters.
Well, I was also going to say there's a reason for that.
Yeah.
It can be, speaking of manipulation, people can be deeply manipulated in that state, which is
because they're so vulnerable and they're just looking for a place to belong. Yeah.
So vulnerable. And it's just, no matter where you go, whether it's a therapist or a doctor or a breathwork facilitator or coach or whatever,
sound bath. Holistic practitioner. Yeah.
Every single space, every single label has opposition, has polarity, has really great humans and really awful, terrible humans who are trying to manipulate you, who are trying to manipulate you with your money.
For their own personal gain. Yeah.
Absolutely. And whether they know it or not, and I think most people in that position actually do know it.
I think so too.
But it's sad to me that in that, all of that is in people's eyes completely canceled.
Yeah.
Then, oh, well, if that's going to happen, then I'm never, ever going to trust anybody. Then I'm never. And if that's, then go.
Yeah.
Then go and do that.
Yeah.
Because I can't. I mean, the only reason why I teach anything that I do is because it's literally, and that's another reason why I think it was upsetting and why some things call me fat and ugly all day. I don't care. But then attack me.
Not true. You'll have mirrors and eyes. You know what I mean?
I mean, it's happened though. People say the most random things, but attack the things that have literally kept me on this earth when I literally didn't want to be here. When I was a young mother struggling with, and call it victimhood, call it sob story, whatever you want. But I have been to the depths so many times, and the stories and the things that I have overcome and the things that I've experienced and the feelings of it being too hard to be here. And ultimately, or feeling like my whole life was a lie. Like, I know that that is a common thing and feeling that most people, especially women, come from when they're removing spiritual abuse from their life, or processing and feeling it.
Yeah.
So then why would I keep that to myself? I know there's other women suffering and struggling, young mothers who don't want to be here. Yeah. It's too fucking hard.
Yeah.
To wake up every morning. I have extreme addiction in my family. I have generational trauma. I have racism in my family. I have polygamy in my family. Like, there's so many things I'm untangling that aren't necessarily all my fault and problem, and my job, which I've learned as well.
Yeah. That's
but
part of it.
I just have to tell this point because it's like, how dare anybody? And I think that maybe people start all like this. Any kind of cult leaders, like, I have a solution. I want to help people with it.
Yeah.
But then it's ultimately like, well, are you being blinded by money? Are you being blinded by sex? Are you being blinded by identity, being considered a guru? It's all those lower chakras being 100%. Inflated.
Yep. Yep.
But if
my solution is the only solution, and if you're not doing it my way, you're doing it wrong. There's markers. There's specificity.
That is the marker.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
If I was to say you can come into my space, but only if you do X, Y, and Z, absolutely not. The only actual thing I ask people to choose into is that they show up with accountability. They show up with sovereignty.
Doing in their own life anyway.
It's a tool that will
also
help save
opposite,
humanity.
By the way, of what is required to be like
in a cult. Thank you.
Yeah.
So I just bring that
they don't
point
want
across.
You to be sovereign in a cult. They want you to be part of the cult. Yeah. Yeah.
and I had to bring that point through because anybody could be like, well, it saved me. I'm going to save other people. It's not even about saving other people. No. It's just that I have
you
tools.
don't have the power to do that. You can support other people, but you can't. People have to save themselves.
I can't do anything. Yeah. I can't even make people be accountable. I can say that all day, but people are going to continue to.
Only I can hold me accountable.
Only.
Yeah. At the end
of the day. So yeah, it's just so interesting, this projections and these considerations of what the cult is and what works for us and what doesn't. And ultimately, that's the goal of what I feel so honored to not just be experiencing, but then be able to create a safe place for women in.
I think that's the cherry on top. That's the bow at the end of this particular part of the discussion with regard to like, okay, so you get the knowledge, and once you have the knowledge, it cannot be unknown, but how do you decide to kind of put forth what you've learned and use it to truly be helpful or to be useful or to kind of set it out there for other people? And that's, I think, why I value knowledge so much, why I'm so careful about the information that I share, why I think twice, 3 times, 4 times before I share it, because what is it? I can't remember the acronym, but is it kind? Is it helpful? Does it need to be said? Does it need to be said right now? There's a methodology and a way to approach info sharing and info gathering, and a system that you can use and apply it to. And in order to do that well, or I would say the act of doing that well, to me is a signifier and a marker of leadership. supportive, healthy leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And again, from my perspective, that whole situation was really just like it was clear to me that she has a wound.
Mm-hmm.
There's a projection there. And given the opportunity, she probably would trade places with you. And I'm not even say that like, girl, she wants to be you, but it is a little bit of fan behavior in terms of like, I'm watching you. I don't necessarily wish you well, but I'm checking in on what you're doing. And then the next step is to try to see if there's anyone who agrees with me.
Yeah, it's evil eye for sure.
100%.
Yeah.
But if this person had taken that one extra step to be like, why is her behavior so triggering to me? Like, no one's saying that she has to join a women's circle in Hell of the Moon every month.
Totally.
No one's saying that. But why is other people doing that in a healthy, safe way bother her? And why does she automatically go to it's a woo cult?
Or like, a casual DM.
Hey girl, what's going on with the full moon ritual?
What's happening?
Is everyone okay? I have questions.
I don't know what's happening, or, they even just the point that she's,
because I'm sure you've been asked that sometimes. It's like,
totally.
Is this a safe space?
People are so weirded out by me. Are you kidding? I just posted my Costa Rica video and it's very out there. And also it's also, it's not, essentially a little minimal because I want to keep the sacred thing sacred. There's a lot I don't share online, but not.
Thank God.
Totally. It's sacred. And people assume sacredness is cult or weird. And
they also fill in the blanks with what they can't see. So again, there's an assumption that whatever you're sharing is all there is.
Totally.
Yeah.
And they're like, what? And there's smoke and mirrors everywhere. And quite frankly, we're all in a little bit of psychosis these days of like, what's actually real?
Yeah.
What's actually being told to us?
The timeline has changed. It has shifted, whether you believe in that or not. Like illusion is everywhere.
Yep.
You want to talk about AI. You want to talk about dead internet theory. You want to talk about tech debt, which is, they're real things. Technology has shifted what reality means.
Yep.
Like a lot of times you don't even know what you're looking at.
Yep.
And you have to triple check it. Yeah. 100%.
Well, and it's coming at a time too, where there's so much noise. And it's a political year. It's every year is political, but it's a voting year. And then it's more loud, I think, than ever
just
before.
In the US, there's been other elections as well globally. Yeah.
And wars globally, where we're realizing who is funding what and what is actually being said. And actually, is that happening?
Yep.
Will we ever know the truth? No. Yeah. All these trails.
Yeah.
And it's becoming more and more clear that we have to be more and more clear about who we are and what that is. And that means dismantling a lot of the illusions that we were told, which is like, wow, hard and scary.
Yeah.
So it's also like,
also a lot of work.
And like so much work that do I have the time?
Because I also still have to pay my bills.
Do I actually have the time to dismantle the fact that people think I'm sorry, but I don't? And if you assume that, then don't follow me. But if you're feeling like you need a place, I'm right here for you.
Yeah.
And also, I have every right to charge what I do. I have every right to give the free,
because you have the receipts.
I have multiple receipts. Whether you think they're valid or not is actually not my concern.
Mm-mm.
And not only do I have those receipts, exactly, and let's not just talk about those receipts. Let's talk about lived experience, because I'm telling you,
which has a lot of value.
If I'm going to let's talk about a clinical therapist. Okay. We're not even going to talk about my clinical hypnotherapy or my registered nurse degree, because a lot of people like to feel safer in those confines of those credentials, which I totally understand. Although we know they're shady everywhere. Yeah. If I'm going to go to a clinical therapist and I'm going to feel into the vibe and frequency of her or him or whatever, I want somebody with experience. I want somebody
who's actually, because you can graduate and be licensed and start working the next day, but do you actually know what the hell you're doing?
Also like, and this is so hard. It's a little nuanced with like somebody that's clinical, because you can't really know what's happened in their life. But I'm telling you, if I could,
and we all bring a certain amount of bias to the work that we do.
I would love somebody I want in the trenches.
Yeah.
How can it's like when I was in nursing
maybe the
school,
trenches actually led them to get the credentialing. Like
obviously
it was a reverse order type thing.
You would think that's a pretty common thing. Yeah. Cause like, that's exactly, we just made that clear with even with your job.
Yeah.
You know when to speak, you know when to shut up, and you want help. You want to help people to do that.
Yeah.
It's even clear. Time and time again, the more education I get, I was in nursing school at 19, 20 years old. Okay. 19. And I was not smart, quote unquote. I was not the smartest. I was not the greatest book work. Right. When I got into clinical setting, bedside,
It's different.
It is different.
Girl, theory versus application is.
Come on. These women that are, and bless their hearts, straight A students, just salt of the earth girls that I'm
What is the
with.
procedure? And it's like, right, but I'm looking at a person in front of me and that's not what is needed.
They can't open the door and say, they couldn't at that time. With experience, they can.
Yeah.
But because of my experience, I do believe, I do believe that I was, because of the experiences growing up, gave me this street smarts, this bedside manner to communicate. I was one of the youngest of 14 kids. I have a gay father. Like, of course I know how to navigate. I had to manipulate to even be seen by my parents.
Yeah.
So of course I'm going to understand the nuances of communicating with somebody. And then on top of that, the different traumas and the different things. Anyway, regardless, it's not just about credentials.
Yeah.
And I actually don't care what people think about who I'm going to help me with my healing or my education or my business or somebody to mow my lawn. I want somebody with experience in
and the skill set
life.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you learn the skills by reading a book or do you learn the skills by application?
Listen,
that's why you're so that's why you're so good at what you do, because you've had how many years of PR work? You said 2 decades.
2 decades, yeah.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
You could be going to college. What did you major in?
Comms, PR. Yeah.
Great, wonderful.
But that was like 4 years. And I have to tell you, I mean, you just said it, theory versus application. What I learned in school about the history of PR and propaganda and who originated it and the guy that founded it and, you know, the medium is the message and all that stuff. You can guess how much of that I've actually used.
Totally.
You can guess.
Yeah. And I mean, and you know, too, with like more readings you do.
Oh, yeah.
The more open your crown chakra is, the more aware you are.
The time that you learn is very specific, right? So technology advances, like the PR that I entered into at the beginning of my career does not exist anymore. We were using fax machines. Now nobody does that. You know what I mean? Give away my age here. But
paper charting in nursing school.
So I was going to say, I imagine you have a probably comparable story. So even if you could absolutely and immediately apply the theory that you've learned in that educational or that certification driven setting, you said this at the beginning of our conversation, the only guarantee is change. So everything that you've learned, there's a good chance you have to throw at least 30 to 50% of it out within the first 3 to 5 years that you're doing whatever it is that you're doing. And that's true for literally every profession. If you're a lawyer, the laws change. If you're an accountant, the codes, the tax change, the rules change, the technology changes. You are going to have to continuously learn something new, which you can only do by being in it.
Yeah. And doing it over and over and over again. The application of such, rather than pointing at the finger of the person that's doing that. And there's, you know, this goes into, I feel called to talk about this too, this idea of, so I've been on Threads and I love Threads.
I like Threads too.
Except I don't know how, like the algorithm does, there's a lot of
certain things.
Yeah, there's a lot of mad people on Threads. And so I see a lot of like coaches being called out and this person's paying this much and this, listen, this is what I'm going to say about all that. At least for me, this is where I see this, because I guide people to business because I've made multiple 7 figures.
You've certainly guided me in a lot of ways. So I
oh
appreciate
my gosh.
you for that.
Thank you. I know we've had this conversation of, because she's starting her business. So it's been really fun to like guide you into those spaces.
At me for not charging enough.
Yeah, literally. There's discernment, people. There's discernment. And so
it goes right along with sovereignty and accountability.
Are you going to yell at the internet because you're mad about it? Or are you going to actually be discernible and see that there's so many beautiful, are the people that you're wanting to pay, are they living a life that you desire?
Yes.
Are they actually making that amount?
Yes.
Are they applying and implying what they're actually deciding to preach and teach? I just think there's discernment.
Yeah. Well, again, it goes back to this idea of accountability and consent with regard to how you participate in these kinds of conversations, right? So if nothing is ever your fault and you were misled and you know, again, this idea of the victimhood, the victim complex, then you will never necessarily achieve the life that you want to achieve, because you never functionally take accountability for the experiences that you're having.
And it's all a distraction, Sarissa.
100%.
It's all energy harvesting. So these people 100%. Are like so bugged can I tell, if I had stopped at one coach that was bad for me, or like one business problem or one like mishap, if I had stopped at all those, I wouldn't be
where you are. Yeah.
nowhere.
Well, the other thing that you actually just triggered the thought. So it's not your job to necessarily always figure out who's trustworthy. It's your job to be trustworthy, and it's your job to use your discernment and be accountable for the experiences that you have. But if I trust you and you betray me, that's not on me. You know what I mean? From there, once I know what has happened and I have that information, that is what I need to decide to do. So I trusted you. You betrayed my trust. You turned out to be a grifter. You turned out to be someone that wasn't living in alignment with your claims, whatever it is. That is where the decision making comes back to me.
Yep.
So if I decide to continue to engage with you, that then is on me. It really is. And that also doesn't mean that every other person that I work with in that modality or in that line of work is going to be in the same way, because I do believe that there are people out there with integrity who are living in their alignment, who are who they claim to be.
Yeah.
So to the point of discernment, getting better at figuring that out, knowing the science that you don't repeat the same mistakes repeatedly, so that you can identify what is true, truth is subjective, and also what is not true. It's so important. It's so important.
It's so beautiful, like what you said, because it's almost the difference between writing someone else's history and writing your own.
Correct.
The energy, the energy of that.
Yeah.
And I find it so interesting, like I do always, the timing of it. One, I have to just say this really quick. A lot of people started following me after that. And then I actually got a few more people that came to Costa Rica on my retreat because of it.
I remember you telling me this.
Any press is good press.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mentioned that because the summer following was so interesting, because I kept seeing all these signposts about legacy and history. It was like, it was just a reminder. And this happens to me all the time in my business. Like I'll see something and it doesn't necessarily happen to me. It's more like I'll see a trend, like all of those period underwear companies getting sued for PFAs right before I launch my PFA free organic underwear. What's crazy about this is that it was just organic, and the company, the brand, were just like literally creating their own thread for this underwear.
Yeah.
And then I got it tested because I was like, oh, PFAs. And it just obviously happened to be a PFA free too.
Yeah.
So I get them tested every year. Anyway, it's just like divine timing. Like when I see signs that things are going
that's what
away.
happens when you follow an alignment. Yeah.
Yes. And it's like the spirit, my guides, my ancestors.
They tell you where to show up. It's up to you to just listen.
Listening, watching as these signposts. It's not like danger, don't get into this industry, or danger, this is going to happen to you, right? So as I'm like going through the summer, we just visited Boston. I was just talking about this, and we're going to all these incredible museums, and I'm looking at these faces. And of course, I'm feeling a little bit more activated because this idea, not necessarily because of this TikTok conversation or this video, it's more just like the climate in the world. Like it was just it was really loud during cancer season for me.
Same.
So I had to like turn off the internet because everyone's arguing about being right. And because they're arguing so much about being right, they're like not worrying, they're not writing their legacy. They're not even worrying about their history. They're worrying about rewriting someone else's history, essentially, is what's happening.
Correct.
So I'm at these museums and I'm looking at these people and I'm just like frustrated with like, how do I even know this history is real? How do I even know who wrote this story about this person? Who's writing these stories?
Yeah.
Because to me, it feels as if history is repeating itself over and over because we have yet to understand how to harness judgment to a way
to integrate the lessons.
Oh my gosh. And then it benefits us, that it's actually propelling us to more of this responsibility to get the education across, rather than we're just yelling at the wrong people that won't hear it, so that we can try to change their history rather than us just worrying about ours.
Yeah. I love history. I think a lot of the future is informed by the past. And if, those who do not know history are doomed to repeat it, there's all the sayings. It also gives you a sense of, honestly, future planning and prediction, right? So people think that there's, which there is a wooey element, an intuitive element, a divination element to prediction, right? And forecasting and things like that. But also like you can gain a lot of information about what's coming by what's already happened. And I think when you speak about history as being written by the victor, or written by the person or people or groups that are in charge, quote unquote, the people who won, that gives you a lot of information. There's a lot that gets left out because at the end of the day, up to this point, I feel like, again, technology may change this, but it was written by people. And you also kind of made this point when you talked about lived experience. We value the written word. We overvalue the written word in this culture, in Western culture. And there is something to be said for the traditions that cannot necessarily, or were not necessarily passed down through the written word. Oral traditions,
Rituals.
rituals that involve dancing and are just more tribal by their very nature, right? There are so many people that have lived throughout time that we know nothing about.
I know.
And they also have history.
Yep.
So how do you recover that? And what part does that play in the history that we do know? And these are all things to think about. And I think even if you never get the answer, asking the question is a big part of that growing experience.
Yeah, I just found it so fascinating that it got me so worked up because it all
Boston's like, it's one of the original 13 colonies, and
the energy was insane there.
History of the Americas there,
Yeah,
there's a lot there.
And of course, I'm looking at like Mesopotamia, and there was like the largest Rome sculpture in America there, super huge. There was like this massive. We were at the Harvard Museum, and this massive whale bone carrying. I mean, whales are the carriers of the history, of the stories of this world, and so it was so activating to feel the frustration of the stories that weren't told before us. And I think for me too, the frustration of what's been ingrained in what are stories. Like a lot of my stories, depending on who you ask, the scripture I read, is it even real? Is the Bible even real? Which translation am I using? And
because there's conflicting information and King James versus
exactly. And what side of history am I listening to? What side of history?
Correct.
It's like, and I also just saw Hamilton last week.
Okay. Is that your first time?
No, but my first time with Jeff.
Okay.
But you know what's crazy? Okay, this is a side note, a note on this, but it's 2018 and I was living in Sugar House and I wanted to go so bad. It was the first time it showed up in Salt Lake and Eccles Theater. And I drove my ass down to the theater and I stood on the block and I said, I want one ticket. Somebody just give me one ticket. I like literally was like begging for it.
Yeah.
Someone sold me a ticket. I Venmoed them and it was literally at the very, very tip top of the theater.
Okay.
And I bawled and I had the most incredible experience. I was so inspired. Now, 6 years later, I was on like, the 15th row or something as a date night with Jeff as like a celebration of this new community space that I had launched that day. And it was just all such a beautiful full circle moment. Because we had bought that there were so many pieces that actually are totally a tangent on another topic, but it was like being aware enough in my body enough to know that the tickets were on sale and also having the money to buy them. I was just I was a completely different person back then, and anyway, it just is so interesting, these ideas of history and what are we actually so worried about?
What are we so worried about?
Why are we trying so hard to get everybody? So then it put me on this huge journey of not only are we letting other people write our history, but we're also so worried about getting everybody to understand our history.
Correct.
When I'm not kidding, every single person in that museum that I saw, every sculpture, I don't know them.
Yeah.
I don't even know the hero's journey. I don't know them.
Yeah.
I don't know where they were.
Yeah.
I will never. So even if we wanted to leave our legacy, is it actually the legacy of written down, she was this and this and this and her, and everything was perfect?
Is that
and then
true? Yeah.
Of course. And then it goes down to like all of the women that made history were rebels.
Yeah.
And that's true too, for sure.
Yeah.
Or like Kuan Yin and the goddesses and Mary Magdalene is such a good example. And anyway, it just like brought me this perspective that I really was grateful for of course, be a rebel and be unique in your own way, but also like, if we want to talk about energy harvesting and what we're doing, what are we actually doing? And who are we trying to write our history for? And I genuinely am like, I'm so sick of being afraid of the words. And it's not even that I'll just say it anyway. I'm so sick of being afraid of words that are said outside of my home rather than the words that are said inside my home.
Yeah.
That's what matters.
Who you are in the daytime versus who you are at night, who you are outside versus who you are inside.
Yeah. And when I say inside, that's even integrity. In my home, it means in my community,
Uh-huh.
the people that me and you, Sarissa,
Yeah, where you're at home. Yeah.
the people that have the one-off, not even the one-off, the one-on-one contact.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
As long as that is clear,
In alignment. Yeah.
because if I'm also, even in the one-on-one, if I'm having a communication with somebody and it goes array, it's my fault that I've created a circle of somebody that I can't trust to then say, oh, they're going to spread my name, or they're not going to understand my, or I'm going to be misunderstood by them. And that's on me, and I'll learn better. And then
you'll do it better next time.
Yeah.
Yeah. You said something that I think is really important to touch on just in this conversation, the context of it. And this is the idea that I've been thinking about a lot of being understood, and the safety that a lot of people get from needing to share their side of the story, right? And I always have to be very careful when I sort of share this with someone, because it comes up a lot when I'm doing my readings and when I'm doing my like divination work, is this idea that like they need to know how they harmed me, or they need to know what they did wrong. Again, I this is where I start to like hesitate. I'm like, well, they don't care. They don't care, because it doesn't fit their story. So everyone is in their own lane with regard to their story, myself included. Like you just because you do this work does not mean that you're immune to these things. And you have to decide after a certain point if it's worth the harm that you experience by constantly telling someone how they've harmed you, versus just being like allowing people who come to you with the intent to misunderstand, do just that, and stay in the space that they are choosing actively to be in, while also choosing to go back to your own space. I like to say that whatever you think I am, you're right.
Yep.
You are correct.
Yep.
And if you don't like me, that's good. And if you do like me, that's good too. And I will meet you there.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
What do you think of the quote that says, whatever you think I am, you are?
I think that's true to a certain extent, because again, we have this idea of projection. But I also think like I have mixed feelings about the mirror theory, as someone who kind of like often shows up as a mirror.
Totally.
Some of it is, yes, whatever I see in you probably exists in me as well, especially again, if you identify with this philosophy of universal consciousness, oneness, etc. We are all everything and nothing. But I think the period of time that we're currently in lends itself a lot easier to this idea that like, again, whatever you think I am, you're right, which is then to me extends out into this idea that like, whatever I am, so are you. Because if you see something in me that you don't like, or that you do like, and you're right about it, how are you able to identify that? Is that that's a language that you must speak already? So
Totally.
same. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it really throws people off when they're like, you did this and you're like, okay.
Yeah.
They don't know what to do with that.
I also think it's not exclusive to the idea of like the past, present, and future, right? Because if time doesn't really exist, it's all a spiral, right? So I can see so much of me in her and in their interactions with people that.
Well, I mean, you said it supersedes the past, but also like a past version of yourself, or a version of yourself that you needed to kind of like, again, integrate in order to become who you are. 100%. Yeah, absolutely.
Which is it's good to have perspective of that, because I also think that there's this idea of like trauma bonding within yourself in the spiritual culture.
And it allows for empathy, but like being mindful of it allows for care and application of empathy. Yeah.
Rather than being like on the rat race constantly of like, oh, I'm always projecting. Why do I have these people in my life? Why is this happening? I think that that idea is coming to a place of people think that they're going to hit this extension of perfection, or this extension of, what's the word I'm thinking of? When you're like Switzerland, neutrality. In a space of also writing your history. Yeah. Which I mean, it's not going to happen.
Growth is constant. It's the constant process.
And if growth is constant, you're going to constantly see the polarity
change. Yeah, 100%.
And so it's so interesting, because I'm like, okay, I'm not going to ever have anybody else say anything bad about me. That's the shadow. And it's actually like, I have to just continue to be okay with it. If I'm going to show up and actually, and for me, at least, I feel like to write my history, it is continuing to show up.
Yeah.
in so many facets in my home and my business regardless. And so that is the contrast that will continue to show up for me.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of me. I do think I'm getting better and better at being understanding that that is a consistent constant. And as long as I am continuing to unwind and heal the pieces of me that want to be completely understood.
Yeah.
And that can happen more and more while I continue to be more integral with myself.
It's also
throughout
just
the
like
way.
part of the journey. Like some people are here in your environment and in your space and in your frequency to misunderstand you, to show the ways that you can be misunderstood.
And then you don't die.
And you live through it. I have a pretty polarizing personality, I think. People talk to me and they tell me, "Oh, I was intimidated by you when I first met you," and I'm always someone who has had a certain level of self-awareness. I think even when I was a kid, obviously I would hope I've gotten more self-aware as I've matured and I've become more familiar with myself. But from an early age, I knew that someone being intimidated by me wasn't necessarily a me thing. It doesn't necessarily mean that I'm intimidating. So if you get to know me, I'm actually kind of goofy. I'm kind of silly as a person, but I do have, like I said, an air of seriousness, I think, that comes across. And if you have a fear of seriousness, if you have trauma associated with things not being fun, with things not being able to play, etc., then I could see how my energy would be either off-putting to you or would be something that you would want to shy away from, etc. And I don't take it personally when people say that, because I'm like, okay, to me, that's a sign that, like, one, it's a reminder that, like, again, not everyone is for me, which is okay. But also, like, if you feel like I'm not the vibe for you, then stay away from me and I will stay away from you. And it's good to know. And I think it's important to recognize, as much as we're recognizing the spaces that are for us and where we belong and where we have that emotional and physical and ideological safety, it's also important to recognize the spaces where we do not belong and the places that are not for us. That is just as important. Like you said, those polarities.
So tell me how that was always. What was it in your childhood that made you confident in knowing that, like, you're not for everyone and that's okay?
I mean, obviously having experienced life as not just a Black person, but specifically as a Black woman, and all of the stereotypes that surround us, particularly in Western culture, particularly in America, it was showed to me early on that I was othered, right? So you can kind of go two ways, right? When you're constantly othered in any environment. And this is specific to my experience, but not just specific to Black womanhood. You show up and you can either do your best to assimilate, to adopt the language, the patterns, the habit, the dressing style, and basically go undercover, camouflage yourself, mold, bend, shape yourself to kind of fit into these spaces that were not meant for you, but that you desire to be in. And I'm not like, I'm just kind of stating that as fact. It's not a good or bad thing necessarily, but it does require some level of self-sacrifice. It removes your agency to a certain extent. It removes your sovereignty to a certain extent, because you are not fully able to show up as yourself, because by the very design of these spaces, they're not meant for you, right? So that's one. On the other hand, you can kind of accept that no matter what you will do, you will be othered. And like, obviously we all have a world that we move through. I've spent most of my life in spaces that were not necessarily designed for me, but I've done quite well in them. And it's really just kind of striking that balance, while also knowing that, like, at the end of the day, this is not a space that is designed for me. It was not a space that was created with me in mind. So at the point where it becomes, again, a place that is no longer safe for me to inhabit, whether that's because of the environment itself or whether it's because I've swung too far in the abandonment of myself, then I have to go back. And that's where, like, again, terms like manipulation come into play, because I know if I show up in a job interview for a big company, for one of these Fortune 50 companies that I've worked for, and I speak a certain way and I sound a certain way and I present a certain way, that I'm more likely to be successful in whatever I'm pursuing in that role.
Yeah.
Conversely, if I were to present a different way, if I were to speak a different way, if I were to use different terms of phrases, it would be a signifier that I did not belong and I would be rejected. And those are kinds of things that you have to reconcile with. So from a very early age, anyone who occupies a marginalized identity of any type was shown those things. And it was kind of like, you're just taught from, again, a cultural perspective. I also think some of it is just personality. My childhood was definitely not perfect, but I actually had this conversation with my therapist last week. Essentially, I never really had to question whether specifically my parents, but most of my family as well, was on my side. So I like to tell the story of one of my fourth grade teachers who, I imagine he's probably in his late 20s, early 30s at the time. He was young. I was in fourth grade, and I've always been like I know how to follow the rules, but a lot of time I choose not to. And I've always been that way. And I've known for a long time that I also have the ability to like kind of like stir up a space. And when you're a kid, you're messy. So what would often happen is because like, I was a good student, I was bright, and I was social. I was the only child for a really long part of my childhood. I think I was 9 years old. Yeah. So my closest sibling was 2 or 3 years old. And my second brother after him was about 1. So it was me, a child, and then I had 2 baby brothers.
Okay.
I'm the only girl. So I would show up and, talk while the teacher was talking and things like that. And my teacher didn't like that. So I would frequently have parent teacher conferences where basically he'd be like, Sarissa's bright, but disruptive, essentially. And my parents always kind of came in with the idea that like, that's kind of your fault for not being able to handle a room full of 9-year-olds. Like, she's a 9-year-old girl. Why can't you maintain control over a 9-year-old girl? I remember there was one time he had, you remember those pointers, those long wooden pointers with like the rubber tip and the apples on the end of them? So he had one of those and he was like swinging it around in class. And he wore these really thick glasses. He swing it, hit himself in the face, hit himself in the glasses with the big apple on the pointer and knocked his glasses off. I started laughing because it was funny and I was a kid.
And you're 9.
And I was 9. And I started laughing, and then all the other kids started laughing. Kind of lost control of the room for about 5-10 minutes. That resulted in a parent-teacher conference. And I remember distinctly, like I was waiting out in the hall. My parents were in the room. I got called in, and they were like, "Did you laugh at your teacher?" I was like, "I did. It was fun. I don't really know what you want me to do." But in that moment, both my mom and my dad, essentially, again, were like, you really can't expect a 9-year-old to operate on the level of someone who's an adult. Like, she's literally still developing from
literally
a
have
mental
no prefrontal cortex.
Correct.
Yeah.
Like for years to come. I just barely got it.
Yeah. Literally.
So like having that foundation of safety, emotional safety, I think empowered me to kind of be able to show up effectively in these spaces that weren't necessarily meant for me. I was informed in as many ways as my parents were capable of informing me about what the requirements of me would be, what the expectations of me would be. And, sometimes I listened, sometimes I didn't, but I will say it did come in handy when I'm sitting in these spaces. And it, again, some of it's just personality, but listening more than you talk is a game changer.
Yeah.
If you're ever uncertain of how you're supposed to be showing up in an environment, all the game changer is observation.
Yeah.
And through those categorical sort of experiences, I've sort of been able to like kind of identify and be like, okay, along with a lot of self-work and practice that allows me to sort of not dissolve the ego, because you need a little bit of ego to survive, but like to take some of the personalization away from it. So to my earlier point, like if you like me or if you don't, it says more about you than it does about me. And I don't mean that in like a rejective way. I mean that more like, okay, like if I just show up as myself, what's meant for me will come to me and what's not will stay away from me. And it's my duty to identify it when it crosses my path. That's that discernment. Yeah.
Well, and to that point too, you were saying how the algorithm is so brilliant now that if you really just are authentic, it'll show you the people that need to be shown.
I have a really good experience in general on social media because I am committed to controlling my experience there.
Beautiful. Mic drop. And
yeah.
I wanted to touch on, first of all, thank you so much for that insight. I think it's really, really, really powerful. One question before I bring my pieces to it is, since you are still actively in the workplace, have you noticed the margins soften at all?
Honestly, the first answer that came to me was no.
Yeah, I wondered.
Because so the shape has changed. I'll say that. Like the shape of the margins, I would say they're wavier than they used to be.
Okay.
I don't want to claim that as progress though, because
totally,
they may be wider in some areas, but they're more narrow in others, right? So numbers, and people love to talk about representation, are not necessarily indicative of change. If you go back to slave days, there were Black people working in the house. There were Black people with all kinds of jobs. Not every Black person during the era of slavery in America was automatically a slave. And I feel like when you talk about history, like there were Black people, there were always Black people. And I'm speaking specifically of Black people, but there were always marginalized people who were inventors and were painters and were artists, etc.
And what history is that being told? Right. Yeah.
So I say that to say that when you think about the idea of marginalization and how you're sort of meant to show up as a marginalized person in spaces that were not created for you to be successful. Again, there's a little bit of contortion that is an automatic requirement of inhabiting those spaces. And, sometimes you learn to play the game. We have terminology for it. Now we have better sociological and psychological understanding of the toll it takes, but also the access it grants. But you cannot dismantle the master's house with his tools, right? So if the organizations and the structures were built with a certain kind of function in mind, that is the function they serve. And it does not matter if you manage to somehow get in, they're still serving that function by and large, whether that's on a mid-level, micro level, or a macro level. And it really comes down to tolerance, right? And some people, they enjoy the contortion. They enjoy the experience of, I call it abandonment, but they might see it as their identity.
Yeah.
So it's tricky.
I mean, it's talk on sovereignty again too.
Yeah.
And it's like, you can't heal someone else.
But also, like, it's not up to me to decide what healing means for someone else.
Well, exactly. It's like the manipulation, like it's inherently wrong. And maybe they're comfortable in that.
Yeah.
And also at the same time,
keeping up the illusion is a lot easier than,
I mean, in my experience always.
Yeah.
I'm like, I wanted to believe.
Yeah.
It would be a lot easier for me to stay there in
that's the dark side of what once you cannot unknow.
In every single cell of my body, my life would be easier.
I get it.
With every interaction, with every family member, with everything.
Yeah.
With life, money, at the depths of it.
Oh yeah.
However, whether we like it or not, and whether those people that are in that, which I'm like, stay there.
Yeah.
If you can be that, if that's your karmic path for this life, stay there.
Yeah.
But we are on the cusp of something super brand new.
Yeah.
And I think that, at least for me, naively, I was like, as long as I still work on myself, it'll just slowly, but it's like kind of a consistent discomfort until it really does shift. There's a lot of accountability we have to look at in the mirror.
Yeah.
And, a piece of that for me, as listening to your story, I couldn't help but think about the differences of our childhood, because growing up in a religion that literally told me I was the chosen one, right?
Mm-hmm.
But only if I was to do
the rules. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it was
conditional.
Because I'm thinking like, okay, so where in your life were you able to be like, I am who I am? I feel like, to me, it was like the only thing that kept me going as a child was the idea, the brainwash that I was better, this grandiose behavior.
That's really interesting.
Because without it,
requires a very high level of self-awareness and honesty to acknowledge. Because nobody normal, I don't think, psychologically normal, wants to admit that they only kept going because they thought they were better. I don't think. I
mean, it's definitely a hard pill to swallow. But if I'm being real, I mean, if you look at the context of at least the church I grew up in general, it's that like we're chosen, and ultimately the argument would be that everyone is, but as long as you're a part of that church. And maybe they teach things differently now, and I don't know, but as far as my experience growing up, I was told I was a chosen person.
Yeah.
And it makes you feel good, right? It's like, oh, I was born.
It's also incentive to keep doing what you're doing, to keep following the rules, because you don't want to not be chosen.
Right.
Yeah.
And I've been, the last few years, especially, I've been considering how interesting that is, and how damaging, one, and also two, the gratitude that I have for it. Because if I had known that I was just like everyone else, it would have been a lot harder for me to endure the things that were difficult for me in my journey.
That's interesting.
So although I had this idea, this deep privilege of feeling that, I also had this concept that it was only because, and my brain couldn't differentiate between the two.
Yeah.
It was it coincided with me being this person.
Yeah.
Now that I understand more, it's like, oh, I was only that if I did these things.
Right.
So now I'm not doing these things. Everything's dissolved. Who even am I?
And I think that's some of the challenge that people experience.
1000%. And if nothing matters, if I'm just the same as everybody else and none of this matters, then why am I here?
Yeah.
Versus, oh, none of it matters.
Yeah.
Right. Then what? Then why am I taking it so seriously?
I get to decide. Yeah.
I get to choose.
Yeah.
And what a gift that actually we're all the same.
Yeah.
And it's the privilege and responsibility of that now I have to be in such accountability, and the privilege and responsibility to be educated, to have the platform I do, to have the awareness I do, even if it's harder to be aware than it would have been to be non-aware.
Yeah.
But because I have that, I do have an obligation to then in
Act
the
with
right
ethics and integrity. Yeah.
in the right audience that can perceive as such. And I think that's another reason why, one, you're so good at it. And that's another reason why I value who you are so deeply, because it hasn't been until I feel like a baby in a lot of that, in a lot of ways, in that sense.
Yeah.
Because growing up in that privileged space, as deranged and traumatic and how you toxic that was,
Yeah.
that was my truth for a long time.
Yeah.
So now that
It's
I can
valid.
look at it,
Yeah.
totally. Now that I can look at it a different way, it makes sense as to why something like not being liked would be so triggering.
100%.
Which brings me to my point I wrote down a while ago, which was I always knew it was going to come.
Okay.
I always knew somebody. I just had a feeling that, like, and maybe it's because I brought it on myself, right? I mean, we could go nuance that way, but I wasn't going to be, there was no way with the trajectory of my business that I was going to be unscathed. I probably created that myself, but I just had a feeling.
Yeah.
Especially since the climate the last 4 years has been a lot of pitchforks.
Yeah.
And go and attack and look at, and I actually,
without really gaining enough information to be able to do all that effectively.
Of course, sure. But I actually think it's a response to the environment of things, the illusions shifting.
Yeah.
So now all of a sudden everything's not real. And so no one knows what's real. So everybody's trying to figure it out. So everyone's lifting up everyone's skirts. Everyone's pointing the finger.
It's a great analogy. Yeah. Because literally.
So it's like, we hate cancel culture, but like, do we blame us? Do we actually blame ourselves?
I think the definition has evolved. I understand the terminology, but I've never fully believed. Like, I don't think people really get canceled. But
No.
I think that's slowly shifting. And I think the rationale was because feeling like you've been canceled and actually being canceled are two different things.
Yep.
To me, being canceled means you don't have access to the same resources that you did before. You don't have access to the same privilege that you did before. Your life has changed as a result of the behavior that you engaged in. That's, to me, what canceling is. That's a very high level definition. I think what people think cancel culture was like someone not liking what you did and talking about it. And I'm like, that's not quite what it is.
All the pitchforks coming together and then nobody buying. That's, yes, yeah. Keep going.
No, yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. But I also think that, like, again, with enough time and listening and observation, what actually happens a lot of the time is just another cycle of death and rebirth. And as you grow, as you evolve, the people that are not meant for you anymore, the environments and the communities that are no longer, again, safe and in alignment with what you're trying to do, will fall away. And that, I think, can feel a lot like being canceled. It's interesting that you talked about this idea of being chosen and your inherent worth and value, because I think without even realizing it, my parents sort of instilled in me, again, whether they meant to or not, because I don't know if this is actually their philosophy, was that my value was inherent by virtue of the fact that I exist. In theory, my value is inherent, and that I've always had the sense that, like, the goal in life, and this is partially because, like, I didn't grow up religious in the same way a lot of other people did, but the meaning of life, what it means to do here, your mission, your path, your purpose, as a lot of people would say, is to live it and to experience it. That's why we're here, in my opinion. So being able to kind of effectively weigh those two things and come to understand them more deeply in my journey, in my evolution, has been really crucial in how I've been able to navigate and approach the things that have been difficult for me, conflicts that I've experienced, my losses, my gains, etc. Because it's happening to me, but it doesn't always have to belong to me. It's really interesting that you say that. So yeah.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, to have that instilled in you as a child is just such a gift. I also feel like, thank God, because of everything else that was being thrown at you, which I know that you're not a victim of, but it's just so interesting to point out. And I'm so glad you shared, because I think it's so important for people to understand and be aware of. And that's ultimately what we're trying to move away from.
Yeah.
And
which we have to do together.
And if you can't take away your worth, then no one can be canceled.
Correct.
Ultimately, even the people that are actually really shitty.
Yeah. Deserving of it. Yeah. 100%.
So if we actually really understood that, but I think that
and it doesn't have to be for good either. Like the most extreme toxic narcissist, if they, which inherently, I guess, psychologically is impossible, but if they believe enough in what they're doing, you cannot remove them from their own pedestal, essentially.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean
It's
to cut
the
you
psyche of the mind.
Yeah.
It's actually magic.
Yeah.
And if we actually, and it's not just magic, it's
reality.
science.
Yeah. 100%.
And, it goes along with
reality.
Absolutely. Which is interesting. The point of me being, talked about, but I think about that a lot because we'll go back to another truth that I was taught. It was like, if you leave a religion, your blessings are gone.
So all that goodwill you built up, just
poof, and then I'm like,
instant.
I'm not going to make money.
Interesting.
So that's another reason why, that TikTok was so heightened emotionally, because in essence, it was like pitchforks to take away the money I've worked so hard to get outside of a religion that told me I couldn't get it without it.
This fear of like, they were right.
Totally.
Yeah.
I did this to myself.
Yeah.
I used to literally, the reason I started buying plants in the first place was so if I watered them and if I could keep them alive, I was a good person.
Here, by the way. Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
But if I could water them, I'd be a good person.
Yeah.
If I could keep them alive.
Yeah.
Crazy that I would think that showing something would have anything to do with actually who I am. Regardless, that was a side note. But as I grow older and see and expand, and it's like this, we were talking about yachts in Boston.
Mm-hmm.
Who are those people? What are their dealings? Who are their morals?
I don't even know if they could tell you sometimes.
They
tell you about what they have and what they do, but not who they are.
It's just crazy how it doesn't actually matter.
Mean anything. Yeah.
But for me, and you could go off on my chart and my morals and my Cancer moon and all these things, morals do matter to me, which is another reason why it was so painful in many ways. Yeah. It's painful for me that this point was brought up. But I would have never been ready ever for it to happen before this. And I think a lot of people get canceled or people get, bring up things or talk about them in a mean light, or something goes viral about them for a lot less than what I've created.
Yeah.
And I say this,
you've been at it for a while.
Exactly. Which is another reason. Actually, I remember you saying, like, what is she doing? You're like in this for 15 years.
She's honestly, shout out to her for being as brave as she is.
She's like, I'm scared.
If I were her, I wouldn't have had shit to say.
I'm like, it literally doesn't even, why me? Like, have I not proven? Anyway. So that's wild, because
also, side note, to me, that's just more evidence that it's all a projection, because like
totally
it seems almost straightforward to go after someone that's like all of a sudden like coaching and doing all this stuff. But like, how many years have you been doing retreats?
Yeah, 10. 10. I know.
I'm like, okay.
I know.
Choices.
It's so interesting. And, but I've always said, which is perception, I'm always watched over. Like, my guides are so good that I really don't get a lot of hate. I really don't, for the platform that I have, for how long I've been in this, for the evolutions, for how weird I am. I really am protected a lot.
Yeah.
And I learn lessons in a way that is so beautiful that it doesn't dismantle what I've built. So many, I've almost lost my marriage. I was in a huge lawsuit. This person claiming that what my words were his, wanting millions of dollars. None of it has done anything but continued to grow.
That's
this
a blessing.
platform.
That's a blessing.
And you know why it is? It's because I believe it. Because it consistently proves to be true time and time again. Yep. And the one thing that wasn't proven yet was a viral TikTok about me to try to cancel me. So of course I would have to check that off my list as an ego manifester, as an ego projector, as my incarnation cross, the cross of tension, as the 2551 channel of initiation. Like it's just me experiencing life and knowing that I can get on the other side of it. And then ultimately, which is what I do with everything, take that and the lessons and bring it to my community. Let me teach you how to manage and move through this.
Yeah.
Which ultimately is what you do with divination and astrology, and you help segue people into potentially learning the lessons, maybe in a little bit more graceful way. That's the prayer, right?
TBD. I mean, I think, I think this is the last point I'll make on this is this idea that like, when we are having these experiences or sharing this knowledge, it's information that people are not already aware of and they don't know. And in my experience, I would say 10 out of 10 times, anything I'm sharing with someone, either through, my tarot or my chart or whatever, chart readings, or even just, the divination that I do as a channel, and intuitive, they're like, oh yeah, no, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's all already within you. It's all information we already have access to. It's all already information that we know. And when I say no, maybe it's not at the front of our mind. It's not in our short term, but it's an inner knowing. It's a human knowing. It's an existential knowing. And we just have to be reminded on occasion.
Yeah.
So I look at my role as more of a person who serves as the reminder and is, again, bringing the language and the timing versus sharing things that you aren't
ready for.
Yeah. Or aware of. Yeah.
Yeah. When did you do my reading? Was it before or after the video? Do you remember?
I feel like it was before.
I think it was,
right?
Because didn't you mention something about?
I did. I know what you're going to say, and I did.
What did you say exactly?
I mean, I think the actual language I used was like, it's giving cult leader. But how that was showing up in your chart was effectively just people are drawn to your natural leadership qualities. I mean, I'm not as deeply familiar with human design, but you just name checked based on what I understand a whole bunch of leadership qualities. The interesting thing about being a projector, though, is that you have to quote, wait for the invitation, right? So that's, I think, what actually stopped you from being an actual cult leader is that people have to invite you in and be receptive to what you're saying. Otherwise, you cannot stay. Almost, it's not. This is not a one-to-one, but like a vampire. Like you have to invite me in, and you have to want me there, and you have to want me to stay there. This is gonna go. They're gonna take this part.
They really are. They really are. She's gonna. Someone's gonna, like. Someone's gonna take it.
But no, there's a natural leadership quality, and I think the charisma, you're obviously a very charismatic person, you're beautiful, and you have a life to which a lot of people aspire to, which is what I think people are drawn to initially, but it goes so much deeper than that. And you are here as a change maker based on your chart. You are here as someone who's kind of meant to kind of shake the bedrock a little bit. And the more that you embrace that, the more that you do it. I mean, we talked about this on the way over. Some of our mission here, I do believe that some people download into this reality, into this timeline to be what we would call bad. They come here to mess things up.
They're like the villain in the story.
I mean, I think a villain has a value ascription to it.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes, but like,
yeah.
That's what I would say. But you look at people and you're like, how do they keep getting away with it? They do all these bad things. They keep getting away with it. I could name some names, but I won't. I think the reason for that is because they come to us, they come into our lives, and this could be on a macro level, public figures that we know, and also just people in our lives who just seem to like
get away with everything.
Just seem to sideskate the consequences. One, they're not, because again,
karma.
Also 10 times out of 10, these people aren't particularly happy. They don't like themselves very much.
Smoke and mirrors.
Like they usually look awful because of all the vitriol that lives within their energy. Yeah, 100%. And it's hard for them to find bearing in community and safety. They don't have safety because that's their job to be here, is to represent what a lack of safety looks like, right? And then you have the people that kind of come here to, I consider myself one of these people, to be a little bit more off-putting, to not be everyone's cup of tea, to be maybe a draw on first approach or first glance. Again, people like you because, you're attractive and you have this life to which they ascribe to, et cetera, et cetera. But then they get to a little bit closer and they're like, I don't like what I'm seeing. That's fine. And then you have people that come here and they're just, everyone loves them. They're charismatic, they're friendly, they're nice, et cetera, et cetera. I would say those people to me are fewer and further between, but it might just be because my own energy is meant to be off-putting. So I tend to attract other challenging people.
Yeah.
But we all serve a role. We all are here for a purpose. I do believe in a universal law, not in the way that we think of laws, but more just like, everything tends toward entropy, and 1 + 1 will always equal 2. The universe seeks balance. It cannot sustain anything too imbalanced for too long because it results in decay, and the universe wants balance. So even though we're all heading toward a certain designated destruction, eventually, hopefully millions of years from now, the sun will burn out. But in the meantime, it can't be too hot and it can't be too cold because everything on Earth will die. And when that happens, or if that were to happen, you would see the outsized effect of it, right?
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Wow. Love. Holy shit.
We got into some stuff here today.
Incredible. That was beautiful. It's balance. It's knowing where you play in your life. And it's also the ultimately like, can you fall asleep at night knowing that you're doing your best
And that you are who you say you are.
behind closed doors?
Yeah.
Because then if you are, nothing that is said
You don't have
should
to worry
bother
about
you.
it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you know it's true. And your people know it's true.
Yeah. And that's at the end of the day all that matters.
It is.
And one last question.
Sure.
How do you, Sarissa, find the wild or stay true to the wild within you? And what does that mean to you?
How do I find the wild? I mean, I think my default setting is a little wild.
Totally.
So that it makes it's just my natural state of being. It makes it a little bit easier. I think, again, we go back to talking about being ethical and having integrity. And like, that doesn't necessarily to me mean like everyone likes you all the time or that you're always good. To me, it just means trying to do right by other people, really keeping that good old golden rule in mind that every religion seems to talk a lot about. Right. How much application there is, I don't know.
Yeah.
But treating other people like you want to be treated, operating from a place of empathy, and using information for the purpose of growth versus sabotage. And I think being willing to acknowledge where you've fallen short when it does happen, because it will happen. Also, that ever-present ability to adapt and remain flexible, because whatever's currently going on in your life at any given time, guarantee that it will change. And however many lifetimes that you live, however many times you die and are reborn, it's all just part of the process. So for me, the representation of, or the meaning of being wild is to evolve, to change, and to live it, to feel it, to own it, to be embodied
in your own unique way. Yeah. Which is so wild, such a rebellion.
Yeah.
What's the one phrase that you always say?
Being quiet is free.
Yes. I hope that you like trademark that.
I should, huh?
Being quiet is free.
Every day. Being quiet is free, but you get what you pay for. I've added on a little bit of an addendum.
But you get what you pay for.
You have to know when to apply it. But being quiet is always cost you pretty much nothing to be quiet. Yeah.
Yeah. And I really loved that concept even when this whole thing went down.
It applies. And again, that's not to say that there isn't a time to speak up and say it and be counted and be heard, but at the very least, you will not incur additional harm more often than not if you just wait a beat.
And that action of silence, there's so much that can be said in the ethers.
It creates a lot of room.
Lots of understanding, removing the emotion and understanding why everything's happening for what it needs to be.
Yeah.
Amazing. So Sarissa's obviously incredible. She does tarot card readings, astrology readings.
I do.
Are you doing the consulting PR stuff too?
I am. Yeah. Okay. I am. I've officially been a consultant through my side business, which is called Suite Number 9, like a door with the number 9 on it, like a suite, for about 8 years now, unofficially, but officially, we're stepping out this year. But again, that's on top of 20 years of official corporate experience at some of the biggest companies on earth, apparently. But yeah, if you ever need risk management, reputation work, crisis management, speaker prep training, I also do that as well.
Incredible.
With a touch of woo on top.
Love. And also follow her on Instagram. Your astrology readings are my favorite.
I'm going to start to formalize them a little bit more. I'm in the process of having a website built. So once this goes up, it'll probably be live.
She's great to follow on Instagram. She just is articulate but hilarious at the same time, knows how to do wit. It's beautiful. So tell me, Is Sweet Number 9 another Instagram as well, or is it all through
It is,
Sarissa?
but I never post there.
Okay.
I'm so like, I think working in the social media space kind of gives you, you probably know this, it gives you kind of fatigue, honestly.
Totally.
And I'm not really someone that is seeking scale or audience, to be honest with you, but my Instagram, if anyone wants to follow, it's R to the Issa, RTOTHEISSA, because I used to really love Jay-Z and he had a song that, H to the Izzo. But also you could theoretically Google me and find me that way too.
Yeah. I mean, so another thing that we're working on with being seen as a Scorpio is that it's beautiful. It's perfect and people should follow you. And if they feel called because of the things that you have to say are important and incredible, your medicine's incredible. And I'm so grateful for it. And it's helped me so much in all of these different pieces of my life. And yeah.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Thanks for being here. And I hope that you remember always to be wild and find the wild within you. And remember, cancel culture is only a thing if you let it be. So remember your integrity and remember
said by a PR person.
Yeah. Remember that you are never too much and always enough. See you later.